Humans have always had a unique relationship with the environment around us. But it's fair to say that some people seem to have a much closer bond with nature to the point of, well, lunacy. From a thousands-year-old mountainside temple to a completely mysterious cliff-top town, here are the strangest places where people actually live. Scola Tower, Italy. When being bombarded with overwhelming enemy attacks, it's important to have a place of shelter that will basically absorb all the incoming fire. For most of us today, that place would be the Taco Bell that we hide in when the middle school kids troll us on Twitter. But in the late 1700s, Italians took salvation in a curious little structure known as Scola Tower. Designed as a way to shelter soldiers from the incoming attacks, Scola Tower is a 42 feet tall building constructed to defend on behalf of the Senate of the Republic of Genoa. And it worked for a short time. While people really did live in the building, they were forced out by 1800 due to Napoleon's continued battles with the British all but destroying it. By 1915, the tower was considered to be so useless and out of date that Italian officials were planning to demolish it until one government expert stepped in to save it as a historical landmark. A quick glance at Scola Tower, and it's a mystery how anybody could manage to live in it for longer than 10 minutes. But this was a home for soldiers, and we all know that they're stronger than the average Joe like me. I'm too busy spending my time in Taco Bell. Santuario Madonna della Corona. Nature is rarely well behaved, which makes it more impressive to see that a gorgeous church like the Santuario Madonna della Corona has been completely unharmed by the rock face that surrounds it almost completely. It's really tempting fate, but it looks like fate isn't that interested, which is a sign of incredible self-restraint. Built in 1530, the Santuario Madonna della Corona, or Sanctuary of the Lady of the Crown, can be found in the cliffs of Mount Baldo, and looks pretty much exactly as it did back when it was first built. The only major difference, really, is the amount of people that come to visit. And that's probably only because cameras were not as easy to carry back in the 1500s. Back when the church was built, the church became a popular place of worship for hermit monks who would seek solitude and nature to reflect and make their prayers. Many of these monks made their home in or near the church, which really does show a great deal of faith given that, well, they're on the edge. Today, tourists continue to flock to the site, and religious figures are still in residence at the church, which offers what may as well be one of the most breathtaking views available at any church in the world. If you can make it up the steps, that is. Prajama Castle, Slovenia. If you ever happen to find yourself on the run from the Holy Roman Empire and in search of safe and secure place to hide, feel free to stop by southern Slovenia. They have a lot of great hiding spots, including the legendary Prajama Castle. Built all the way back in the 11th century, Prajama Castle has been home to a lot of people. But the most famous story concerns a very determined knight in a whole lot of trouble. Also a toilet. Stay tuned. After killing the commander of the Imperial Army and landing himself on the Holy Roman Empire's most wanted list, Erezem Luger found himself in hot water with the Empire. Unwilling to be killed, Erezem sought solace in the allegedly unconquerable Prajama Castle, and it certainly lived up to that promise. Despite their best efforts, the Emperor and his men spent 366 days and nights attacking the fortress with no luck. Unbeknownst to them, Erezem had been making use of a secret tunnel that led from the castle to a nearby village, collecting food and other supplies to keep them moving. Ultimately, Erezem was killed by a rogue cannonball as he went to use the toilet, which really is a way to go, eh? Al-Jahara, Yemen. Long before the days of Twitter, Facebook, and whatever the hot new social media network is, humans were still tracking their day-to-day movements for all to see. Admittedly, they were doing it to ensure their place in history was intact, as opposed to sharing details about their food or Coachella experience. Still, while humans have always been fairly good at noting our own history, some places are still pretty mysterious, like Al-Hajara. Al-Hajara, or of Rock, was a walled town built in Yemen's Haraz Mountains, made up almost entirely of fortified houses and a series of narrow streets, all built on top of the cliffs. However, that's pretty much all that anybody knows about its past. While we know that the town has been around since at least the 12th century, the history of the town goes so far back that even current residents have no idea when the first settlers arrived to make their home in this cliffside haven. What's perhaps strangest is that even today, today, in the 21st century, the traditions of Al-Hajara have not changed. Much of the town's land continues to grow wheat and other grains, and support many animals that are typical for the region. And, of course, the residents like to dance, apparently. Dancing on a cliff top. There's a new one. Hanging Temple of Hangshan. For those of us that like to believe in gravity, which really should be all of us, the idea of living in a home that is clinging to the side of a potentially unstable mountain maybe doesn't sound quite so appealing. Whether it's the possibility of your house unexpectedly dropping onto the rocks below, or just an unintentional drunken stroll turning into a sudden base jump, it's all just very risky. Yet, people did actually live here. The Hanging Temple of Hangshan can be found in the Shaanxi province and is believed to be the work of a monk named Liao Ran, who built it sometime during the Northern Wei dynasty between 386 and 534 AD.
Very beautiful Buddha statue.
That kind of vagueness really just makes you more anxious about stepping inside it, doesn't it? The temple contains 40 rooms, all linked by a complex and frankly confusing series of passageways, meaning that you have to work hard to remember the layout if you don't want to take an improvised skydive. And if none of that puts you off, the temple is held up by poles that were drilled into the cliffside. But don't worry, they've been restored regularly since 534 AD, we think. Okay, maybe not. We have no idea. Hey, why don't you just step inside and let us know in the comments below. Rusano Monastery. To live in a monastery, one must have a lot of commitment, and a view, apparently. These monks give up their entire life to study and find inner peace, so it makes sense that they would want the most perfect view of the Mediterranean Ocean for their time. But still, this is a little extreme. Located in the heart of central Greece, the Rusano Monastery sits an insane 1,027 feet above sea level, perched atop a cliff that allows it to look over the peaceful country below. That's all beautiful if you don't have vertigo, otherwise you'd be both out of luck and probably consciousness. The monastery was built in 1545 by a group of monks seeking some peaceful security from the many wars and turmoil going on elsewhere. They believed that by making their home a clifftop, nobody could ever invade or cause them harm. And they were right, but probably only because nobody wanted to climb that many stairs. The Rusano Monastery is an incredible structure, and no doubt offers some incredible views of Greece that cannot be matched. It's also a great reminder of a life lesson we've probably all forgotten. If you don't want to suffer the hazards of a tumultuous world, build a home on a clifftop. Matmata, Tunisia. Many of us love to fantasize about what it would be like to live in a beautiful, sun-soaked tropical climate, but most of our fantasies tend to leave out the brutal truths. The sunburn, the unbearable sweat-soaked clothing, the utter exhaustion that comes when the air conditioning fails. Well, Tunisia might actually have that covered. Welcome to the new cave of your fantasies. Matmata is a desert settlement in Tunisia, famous for its creative approach to building climate-friendly homes for residents that also kind of look like paintings. To avoid the intense, overwhelming heat of the desert, not to mention the fierce winds that can kick up, Tunisian architects created the idea of building underground homes. By digging a 23-foot deep, 33-feet wide hole, the construction team could begin cutting artificial caves into the sandstone, creating homes that shield residents from the intense heat, but that are sturdy enough to stand for centuries. It's lovely, if you don't think about the cave-ins. When living in a country with temperatures as hot as Tunisia, it's definitely a plus to have a home that shields you from the intense heat. And living in the desert, you don't really want to be near the sand. You know what? It's probably not worth moving to Tunisia. Just buy a rock and live under that. John O'Groats. Not only is it one of the most northern points of the entire United Kingdom, but John O'Groats has a reputation all of its own, having been described as a seedy tourist trap, pretty average, and Scotland's most dismal town. While all of that may sound a little negative, the truth is that people flock from all over just to see this tiny, mundane town. So there must be something of note here. Right? The main reason for tourists' fascination with John O'Groats comes from its relation to Land's End in Cornwall. Situated some 876 miles from Land's End, tourists often attempt to travel the entire breadth of the country from one side to the other, though almost all of them are pretty disappointed when they get to John O'Groats and discover that it's just another typical Scottish town. It's basically the British version of Route 66, if Route 66 led you to a bank in the middle of Indianapolis. While there is a passionate community of Scottish residents, the town is pretty sleepy and isolated, with a population of around 300. Still, there's a bustling community in this sleepy town, with football games, a book festival, and a whole bunch of tourist activity constantly going on. Again, most of those tourists are pretty disappointed, but that's the joy of John O'Groats. Setenil de las Bodegas. At first glance, it would be easy to believe that the picturesque village, Setenil de las Bodegas, was constructed on some kind of Hollywood soundstage, a stretch of perfectly built Spanish buildings, with giant rock faces hanging over the top like it's from some weird prehistoric adventure movie. But, believe it or not, this is a completely real place, and people have lived in it for more than 25,000 years. I guess it's very affordable. Located in Andalusia, Setenil de las Bodegas grew out of a network of caves, transforming the dank and dark surroundings into something truly beautiful to behold. And, what's more, some of them even have olive groves hiding out on their roofs. So that's beauty and practicality. Historians have found evidence of settlers in this village since at least the 12th century, though some have found evidence that goes even farther back, over 2,500 years. At one point, Setenil de las Bodegas was known for its wineries, which apparently flourished throughout the village's earliest years. But in the 1860s, the arrival of the phylloxera insect infestation all but destroyed the vines, bringing a swift end to that line of business. I bet that it makes some delicious cave water though. Villa Girasol. Could you live in a home that was constantly turning? Not in a crazy Disneyland teacups way, but in a slow-moving, sun-following kind of way. If so, then we have the perfect house for you. Although we have no idea if it's for sale, so please don't submit any offers, we can't do anything with them. In 1929, Italian engineer Angelo Invernizzi came up with a genius idea of a dream house, a home that would rotate to follow the sun, thereby blessing those inside of it with all the health properties of the sun. The Villa Girasol, that means sunflower, is an L-shaped structure built to rotate around a central tower containing a staircase and elevator, allowing the house to move along curvy tracks at a speed of around 9 inches per minute, flooding the home with warm, natural light. It sounds quite nice when you put it like that. Invernizzi's idea is really a forerunner to the sustainable housing trend that we're seeing in modern architecture. And it's also kind of cool to think that you get a different view every minute. It's not so much when you think about the gardening though. Imagine having to run from your own home to mow the lawn. Casa do Penedo, Portugal. While many people continue to claim that Fred Flintstone and his family either never existed or are now long dead, there are those of us who know that you just can't kill the modern Stone Age family. They're going to be yabba dabba doing forever. Well, after years of searching, I finally have the proof. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Fred Flintstone's house. No flash photography, they haven't gotten that technology yet. The Casa do Penedo, or Big Rock, is a rock house located in northern Portugal and bears an amazing resemblance to the home from the Flintstones. But, in actuality, this is far from a Stone Age construction. It was built in 1972. Yes, that's 1972. And, if you can believe it, the actual building of this home, which, may I remind you, is made up of 4 large rocks, took 2 years. Pretty impressive work by someone. I'm not sure who you'd have to call to build a rock home. There's no electricity in the house, and the couch is apparently made up of 1 large eucalyptus tree. But that seems to be part of its charm. The owners of the home like to use the place as a holiday getaway, which is actually kind of cute. I know that when summer hits, I'm often thinking, God, I'd love to be living under a rock about now. Sealand. Sadly, Sealand has nothing to do with SeaWorld nor any other marine-based park. Actually, Fort Ruffs, as it was originally known, was a British government creation of a structure, an anti-aircraft gun platform designed to protect England's coastline against German mine-laying aircraft in the midst of World War II. So probably not the place to take the family on vacation. Located about 6 nautical miles off the coast of Suffolk, Fort Ruffs remained active until 1956, when the Royal Navy decided the Nazis were probably not going to be coming back anytime soon. But then, in 1965, a pair of groovy new residents moved in to create a pirate radio station called Radio Caroline. Unfortunately, that station was shut down 2 years later by Major Paddy Roy Bates, who legally kicked them out. Here's where the story gets really fun. Bates wanted to set up his own radio station, but after discovering that it would not be profitable for him, he instead decided to turn it into his own country, Sealand. Naming himself Prince of Roy, he developed a constitution, a flag, national anthem, currency, and even passports. While the British government tried to shut it down, the tower was legally in international waters. It's now the smallest country on the planet. None of that was a joke. Mount Fanjing. You're just going to have to trust us that this one exists because literally every photo of the location looks like it's been photoshopped somehow. This is Mount Fanjing, a sacred Buddhist site located in China's Guizhou province, and it is very, very real. And as you can see from the clouds surrounding it, it's very high up, as in 8,430 feet high. Willie Nelson has never gotten that high, and he's been working at it for decades. If you're not entirely sure why people are so willing to climb 8,000 steps just to visit two unusual temples linked by a bridge, allow us to enlighten you, if you'll pardon the pun. Many Buddhists believe that Mount Fanjing is a sacred location where you can reach spiritual enlightenment, just as Maitreya Buddha once did, which definitely explains why so many are willing to make the almost impossible trek. But when you look beyond the tourism, it's pretty hard to imagine any person wanting to live in such an isolated home, right? Well, there's always one, or many. Hundreds of years ago, Buddhists would allegedly sleep inside the temples, which, given the immense climb, is completely understandable. I, for one, find it hard to believe that anybody has the strength to climb up and down in the same day. Maybe Tom Cruise, but he's not really human. Bozouls, France. Now, we don't claim to be scientists here, but we know this. You should not be building towns on the edge of giant, mysterious holes. We also know that people do it, regardless. So, what do we know? Anyway, this is the French village of Bozouls. And yes, it is indeed sitting on the edge of a 400-meter wide hole. Before you ask, we have no idea how this village managed to avoid falling into the 100-meter drop for the past 1,000 years. But, against all the odds, it has. And not just that, the locals have managed to turn this potentially fatal side effect into a tourist attraction, with people coming from all over the world to grab a coffee and stare into the abyss. That definitely takes some courage. But as with all the entries on our list, what is most insane is that people actually live here, as in by the hole, willingly. That is nuts. While history has shown that this is a very resilient town, unlikely to slip into the hole or crumble under itself, it still takes some bravery to stay in a home that is right on the edge of a complete and likely quiet destruction. What a rush! Ponte Vecchio. If you've ever had the pleasure of visiting Italy, you'll probably already be pretty confused. Isn't Ponte Vecchio a bridge? Why, yes, it is. And yes, people live in it. No, I don't mean that in a homeless way. Well, probably that too, actually. While Ponte Vecchio dates all the way back to 966 AD, the bridge itself is a more recent construction, although nobody actually knows when it was built, nor who actually came up with the design. What we do know, however, is that people have been living on it since the 13th century, at which point vendors and shops began moving onto the bridge to sell their wares. Small apartments were constructed to allow these salespeople to live nearby, and the bridge has incredibly continued to withstand a whole host of devastating floods. What more could you possibly ask from a bridge house? The phrase, "I have a bridge to sell you," is usually sarcastic, but in this case, it was actually a genuine offer. Luckily for these Italians, it was not a scam, and they now live in a gorgeous little place in one of the most beautiful countries on the planet. But seriously, double check before you go buying bridges. Learn from my mistakes, kids. Which of these weird houses would you most want to live in? Let us know in the comments. Also, check out our other cool stuff showing up on the screen right now. See you next time.